In the early chapters of the Bible, nestled just before the epic account of Noah's Ark, lies a passage so strange, so controversial, that many read past it in stunned silence. It is a brief 4-verse fragment of history that hints at a world impossibly ancient, a world teeming with forbidden unions, cosmic rebellion, and a monstrous offspring that pushed creation to the breaking point. The Bible tells us of the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the terrifying result of their union, a race of beings known as the Nephilim. These figures were the mighty men of old, the heroes of renown, whose very presence on earth seems to be the final catalyst for God's decision to wash the world clean with a global flood. But who were they really? This short passage in Genesis chapter 6 has been the subject of millennia of debate. It is perhaps the single most enigmatic and argued over text in the entire Old Testament. Were the sons of God simply righteous men, or were they something not of this world? Were the Nephilim just tall kings, or were they a hybrid race of giants, the unholy product of a celestial crime? Why does the Bible introduce these figures with such gravity, only to have them seemingly vanish in the waters of the flood? These questions are not just for theologians and scholars. The answer to this mystery unlocks a deeper understanding of the world before the flood, the nature of the spiritual war raging around us, and the profound reasons for God's most catastrophic judgment. Today we pull back the veil on this secret history, exploring the sacred texts, forbidden books, and ancient traditions to finally understand the story of the Nephilim. Our investigation begins in Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. Let us read it carefully, for every word is a clue. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. They were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." Let the weight of these words sink in. In the span of just a few sentences, the entire antediluvian world is turned upside down. The narrative presents us with 3 distinct groups: the sons of God, the daughters of men, and their children, the Nephilim. The text states a clear cause and effect. The sons of God took the daughters of men, and the result was the Nephilim. The event is so grievous, so violating of the created order, that it is immediately followed by God's declaration to limit human lifespan, and shortly after, his resolve to destroy the world he had made. This was not a minor transgression. This was the sin that broke the camel's back. To understand what happened, we must first identify the culprits. Who exactly were the sons of God? Over the centuries, 2 primary theories have emerged to answer this question. The first and more recent interpretation is known as the Sethite view. This theory proposes that the sons of God were the righteous male descendants of Adam and Eve's 3rd son, Seth. In this view, the daughters of men were the ungodly, rebellious female descendants from the line of the first murderer, Cain. The sin, therefore, was one of spiritual compromise. The holy line of Seth intermarrying with the profane line of Cain, diluting their faith and corrupting their devotion to God. This interpretation gained popularity because it avoids the difficult supernatural implications of the text and keeps the narrative neatly on a human level. It suggests a story of apostasy, of the faithful remnant being seduced and led astray by the worldly. However, the Sethite view, while seeming safe, has several significant flaws that we must address. The first is a question of language. Nowhere else in the Old Testament is the term sons of God used to describe human beings, let alone the specific lineage of Seth. Conversely, the term daughters of men is a simple description for all human females, not just those from the line of Cain. The second and more glaring problem is one of consequence. Would the intermarriage of two human family lines, even if one were righteous and the other unrighteous, result in a race of giants or mighty men of renown? And would this specific sin, which has occurred throughout human history, be so uniquely heinous as to provoke a world-ending flood? It seems unlikely. The gravity of God's response suggests a transgression far more fundamental, a crime that was not just sinful but unnatural. To find the original and far more startling meaning of sons of God, we must look at how the term is used in other ancient parts of the Bible. The phrase in Hebrew is Bene Ha-Elohim. Outside of Genesis 6, this exact phrase appears in the book of Job, one of the oldest books in the biblical canon. In Job chapter 1, we read, "Now there was a day when the sons of God, Bene Ha-Elohim, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." Here, the context is undeniable. These are not human beings. These are divine, angelic beings, members of God's heavenly council, who are assembling in his presence. The same phrase appears again in Job 38, where God challenges Job, asking, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God, Bene Ha-Elohim, shouted for joy?" This again refers to a pre-human time where angelic beings witnessed the creation of the world. Based on this powerful linguistic evidence, the most ancient and direct interpretation becomes clear. The sons of God in Genesis 6 were not men from the line of Seth. They were angelic beings, members of the divine spiritual realm, who committed a terrible act of rebellion. This is the fallen angel interpretation. It posits that a group of angels, captivated by the beauty of human women, abandoned their heavenly station, crossed a forbidden boundary between realms, and took on physical forms to procreate with them. This was not a story of human marriage, but of cosmic trespass. It was a horrifying defilement of God's creation, a deliberate attempt to corrupt the human race at its source. The New Testament itself lends powerful support to this view. In Jude 1:6, we read of angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper dwelling place, whom God has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. The Apostle Peter echoes this in 2 Peter 2:4, saying, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment." Both apostles, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, are referencing an ancient, known tradition of angels who committed a specific, terrible sin, a sin for which they were immediately imprisoned to await a final judgment. The context of both of these New Testament passages is a warning against sexual immorality and rebellion. They directly link this angelic sin to the time of Noah, just before mentioning the destruction of the world by the flood. The pieces fit together perfectly. The sin of the sons of God was an angelic rebellion of the most profane kind. If the fathers were fallen angels, then who or what were the children? The Bible gives them a name, the Nephilim. Genesis 6:4 tells us the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. The name itself is a mystery. The Hebrew root word is naphal, which means to fall. Thus, Nephilim most likely means the fallen ones. This could refer to their parentage from the fallen angels, or it could refer to their own character as those who had fallen from any grace. The text then gives us another name for them, Gibberim. This Hebrew word means mighty ones or warriors. It says they were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. This paints a picture of beings with immense power, fame, and physical prowess. They were the demigods of ancient folklore, the epic heroes whose legends were passed down for generations. They were larger than life, not just in reputation, but likely in physical stature as well. This is where the term giants comes from. When the Old Testament was translated into Greek around 250 BC, a version known as the Septuagint, the translators chose the Greek word gigantes to describe the Nephilim. This is the word from which our English word giants is derived. These translators, who were much closer to the original language and culture, clearly understood the Nephilim to be beings of immense size and strength. They were an unnatural hybrid, a fusion of the angelic and the human. They were not fully divine and they were not fully human. They were something else entirely, an abomination in the eyes of God, and their presence on the earth brought about an age of unparalleled violence, chaos, and corruption. To fully grasp the horror of this antediluvian age, we must turn to a source that, while not scripture, was profoundly influential on the thinking of ancient Jews and early Christians. The Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic text ascribed by tradition to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. While it is not part of the biblical canon, it was widely read and respected in the Second Temple period, and it is directly quoted by name in the New Testament Book of Jude. The Book of Enoch gives a terrifyingly detailed, behind-the-scenes account of the events of Genesis 6. It claims to be the story from the perspective of the prophet Enoch, who was chosen by God to pronounce judgment on these rebellious angels. According to the Book of Enoch, the angelic rebellion was a calculated conspiracy. It tells of a group of 200 angels led by a chief named Shemhaza, who descended upon Mount Hermon. There, they swore an oath together, binding themselves to a single terrible purpose: to take human wives and father children with them. The book lists the names of the leaders of this rebellion, giving a chilling sense of organization to their crime. They were not simply falling one by one. They were a legion, a unified army of mutineers against heaven. Their sin was not a crime of passion, but a premeditated act of high treason against the authority and order of God. They knew the boundaries they were crossing and the damnation that awaited them, but in their lust and pride, they chose to proceed anyway. But their sin did not stop at procreation. The Book of Enoch reveals that the gravest part of their transgression was the forbidden knowledge they brought from heaven and taught to mankind. This is the secret history of how humanity became so corrupted so quickly. The fallen angels, called the Watchers in the text, taught humanity the arts of war, the making of swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. They taught sorcery sorcery, incantations, and root cuttings. They revealed the secrets of astrology and the signs of the heavens. They taught women the art of deception through cosmetics and adornment. In essence, they gave humanity the tools for violence, rebellion, and pride. They accelerated human sin, taking a world that was already falling and pushing it off a cliff. This wasn't enlightenment, it was a demonic pollution of the human mind and soul. And what of their children, the Nephilim? The Book of Enoch paints a truly monstrous picture. It says the Nephilim were giants of immense stature, some as tall as 300 cubits. Their appetite was insatiable. At first, they consumed all of the food and resources that humans could produce. They devoured the labor of mankind, growing stronger as humanity grew weaker. But when the food of humans was no longer enough to satisfy them, a horrifying change occurred. The Nephilim turned on their creators. They began to devour human beings themselves. The text speaks of them sinning against birds, beasts, and fish, and then devouring one another's flesh and drinking the blood. The world before the flood, under the reign of the Nephilim, was a charnel house, a place of constant terror, cannibalism, and bloodshed, where humanity was prey and their monstrous demigod rulers were the predators. Now, the true reason for the flood becomes devastatingly clear. The world God saw was not just filled with ordinary human wickedness. It had been systematically corrupted by a demonic intelligence. The very DNA of creation was being polluted. The image of God in humanity was being erased and replaced by a monstrous hybrid. Genesis 6:5 says, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." This complete and total corruption makes sense in light of the Enochian account. The forbidden knowledge and the reign of terror by the Nephilim had created a world beyond saving, a world saturated with violence and demonic influence. The flood was not just a punishment, it was an act of cosmic surgery. It was a terrible but necessary cleansing to prevent the entire human experiment from being irreversibly contaminated. In this context, the description of Noah takes on a new, profound meaning. Genesis 6:9 says, "Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God." The Hebrew word for blameless is tamim. It's the same word used to describe an animal for sacrifice, meaning unblemished, without defect, or perfect. While this certainly referred to Noah's moral character, many scholars believe it also had a second meaning. Noah and his family were genetically pure. In a world where the human gene pool was being corrupted by an unnatural angelic union, Noah's bloodline was unblemished. He was 100% human. This is why God chose him. He was the last pure seed through which humanity could be preserved and the earth could be repopulated according to its original design. The ark was not just saving a righteous family, it was preserving the very definition of what it means to be human. But what happened to the culprits of this cosmic crime? The Bible and the Book of Enoch provide chilling answers. For the fallen angels who fathered the Nephilim, their judgment was swift and absolute. As we saw in the letters of Peter and Jude, they were not allowed to die. Instead, they were captured and bound in supernatural chains, cast into a place of gloomy darkness, called Tartarus in the Greek, a prison for divine rebels where they are held waiting for the final judgment at the end of days. Their fate is a stark warning that rebellion against God, especially by those who have dwelt in His presence, brings a punishment of unimaginable severity. They are the cautionary tale of the spiritual realm. The fate of their offspring, the Nephilim, is just as terrifying and has even more direct consequences for humanity. When the flood came, the physical bodies of these giants were destroyed along with all other flesh on the earth. But because they were part spirit, their spiritual essence was not extinguished. According to the Enochian tradition, their disembodied spirits were left to roam the earth. They could not ascend to heaven as they were unholy. They could not rest in Sheol, the place of the human dead, as they were not fully human. Cursed to wander the earth, these spirits are said to be the source of what we now know as demons. They are the evil spirits that torment, possess, and deceive humanity, forever hating the race they were born from and forever seeking to continue the work of corruption that their angelic fathers began. This ancient belief provides a powerful origin story for demonic forces, explaining their malice and their relentless war against mankind. This brings us to one last perplexing detail in the Genesis account. Genesis 6:4 contains a cryptic parenthetical statement. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. How could this be? If the flood was meant to wipe them out, how could they reappear on the earth after Noah and his family landed? This phrase has led to intense speculation. After the flood, as the Israelites prepared to enter the promised land of Canaan, the spies they sent out came back with a terrified report. They said, "And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." The Bible speaks of several tribes of giants in the land of Canaan after the flood: the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Amim, and the Zuzim. We read of figures like Og, the king of Bashan, whose bed was over 13 feet long, and of course, the most famous giant of all, Goliath, who was a descendant of the Anakim from Gath. So how did they get there? Several theories exist. Some believe there was a second, smaller incursion of fallen angels after the flood. Others suggest that the genetic trait may have been carried on the ark through one of Noah's son's wives, though this seems unlikely given God's intention to cleanse the earth. A more common view is that the term Nephilim became a kind of title used to describe any fearsome giant warrior, much like we might use the word Titan today. The spies, terrified by the large stature of the Canaanite tribes, may have used the legendary name of the ancient Nephilim to describe how intimidating their enemies were. The mystery remains. So why does this ancient, strange, and unsettling story matter to us today? It matters because it reveals the true nature of the world. It pulls back the curtain on the spiritual war that has been raging since before our time. It shows us that sin is not just a human mistake. It is a force, often driven by a demonic intelligence that seeks to corrupt, defile, and destroy everything God has called good. The story of the Nephilim demonstrates the absolute holiness of God's design for humanity and the extreme lengths He will go to in order to protect and preserve His redemptive plan. The world before the flood was a world that had lost its way so completely that its very fabric was unraveling. Ultimately, the story of the Nephilim and the judgment of the flood makes the story of the cross even more powerful. The evil that permeated the ancient world, the pride of the angels, the violence of the giants, the corruption of humanity is the very same evil that Jesus came to defeat. He did not come merely to forgive small, personal mistakes. He came to wage war against the principalities and powers of darkness, to crush the serpent's head and to reclaim a creation that had been under siege since the beginning. The tale of the Nephilim is a dark chapter in history, but it serves as the perfect dark background against which the light of Christ's victory shines with brilliant, world-changing hope. It reminds us that no matter how great the giants in the land may seem, our God is greater still.